The Hudson's Bay Company might be gone, but you know what's still there? The original Bay buildings. They're grand, historic, and boarded up.
It feels like there's an emptiness. It was such a huge place for so long. So it definitely feels like something's missing.
Those big, beautiful buildings anchored downtown blocks for decades. Now, they could just be anchors. Hi, I'm Paul Haberstrood. Welcome to The Cost of Living. Bay buildings, in their heyday, used to be bustling with shoppers and life. Now, they've turned into dark, empty blocks. And that could become a problem for downtowns across the country. Also today, if your answer to the question, when was the last time you switched banks, is, never? Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, why? Up first, Canada's auto industry has been building cars for more than a century. Donald Trump isn't the first threat it's faced, but he could be the biggest. Todd Bedwell started working in Canada's auto industry 20 years ago. His job is to repair the machines that make the parts that make the cars.
I fix the big dies that stamp out the cars. So I'm like a technical guy that does lots of welding and that sort of thing to make sure that when the big dies go to the presses, we can stamp out parts. It's actually quite a fun job.
It used to be a little more fun, before Donald Trump started going on about not needing Canadian cars.
Anytime I turn on any kind of social media or news stories, I'm getting bombarded by it. It makes me more worried, but, what can you do?
What he does is keep going to work. He's 57 and retirement is in sight, so the Trump stuff doesn't keep him up at night. But
there's still that underlying worry that at any moment, Trump could just do something stupid or more stupid, and we'd all be out of work.
Yeah, dark clouds are hanging over the auto industry, which is already much smaller than it used to be. As recently as 1999, Canada was building 3 million cars a year. It's down to around 1.2 million now. GM just cut a shift at its Oshawa plant, so there's another 1,000 jobs gone. And Donald Trump keeps talking about moving Canadian jobs to Tennessee. Now, Trump's been called an existential threat to Canada's auto industry. He's put tariffs on it, says it's a national security issue. But is he really a nail in the coffin?
It's not even something that we could consider that the auto industry would go away, because this industry is too important to our economy.
Brian Kingston runs the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. So he's the head lobbyist for the big three U.S. automakers. And he's heard all the bleak talk about the industry's future, but he's not buying it. He says U.S. automakers have built cars here since 1965, when we first signed the Auto Pact. The industry has grown up together and spent billions on its system of cross-border manufacturing. The idea that U.S. car companies would walk away from that? Brian argues that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Even if there's this view that we want to bring all the manufacturing back into the United States, pull investments and plants into the US, it's not feasible from a business perspective for these companies. I mean, the investments that they've made, an auto plant is a multi-billion-dollar cost, takes years to build. The idea that you would repatriate plants, facilities into the United States on the whims of one administration's short-term trade policy that's just not how businesses make decisions.
He says U.S. automakers like building cars here. And for all the bluster coming from the White House, economics will win out. Because it's good for America to work with us. And it's really good for us to work with them.
We cannot change the fact that we are tied to the wealthiest, most dynamic economy in the world, in the United States. This idea that we're going to disentangle ourselves from the US, be less integrated, is it is an economic fallacy.
If geography is destiny, as Brian suggests, then how do we live next to the US without getting trampled by it? Well, that's where CUSMA comes in, our free trade deal. It's facing a deadline for renewal in July. So a lot of the big questions about the industry's future could soon be answered. Could a deal mean the existential threat fades away? Or could the US actually walk away from CUSMA? For all the speculation about what might happen, Brian still thinks it's early days.
We haven't even had our first discussion with them about the CUSMA renewal process. It's literally kicking off in a couple of weeks. So before we start, shedding a tear about the way that things used to be and finding a new strategy, why don't we try and salvage what we have? And we do have moves. We have leverage and we have things that we can put on the table. And if we are in a world in which the US says no more trade with Canada, we're done, all right, fine. We're going to have to figure out a new path forward. But I'm not willing to write that obituary quite yet.
So Brian makes the case for keep calm and carry on. But what if we're no longer in a business-as-usual world? Listen to the Prime Minister's recent speech at Davos, the one where he talked about a rupture, the one that caused all the fuss.
Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial...
When he says integration, Dimitri Anastakis says he's talking about the auto industry.
We're in this really horrible situation where we're being effectively attacked by our closest partner. This speaks to Carney's statement at Davos, where he said, integration has now become a tool of subordination.
Dimitri is a business historian at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. For a long time, integration was seen as our ace in the hole, because ripping up 60 years of building cars together would hurt everyone. But now it's starting to look like a vulnerability, something that gives the US too much leverage. How that double-edged sword ends up slicing will go a long way to deciding the industry's future. Dimitri says US automakers know Canada is a great place to build cars. They want to be here. But at the same time, Trump is also on an ideological crusade. So economic arguments that would usually matter may just not.
Doug Ford tried to make that conversation when he posted those ads about free trade that used Ronald Reagan's words to try to speak to Americans and speak to Republicans and speak to all these people who are part of this irrationality, to say, come on back, listen to some reason here. And we saw what the reaction to that was.
Yeah, he called off tariff negotiations. So where could that kind of capriciousness leave our free trade deal? One way or the other, we'll know more in 6 months. Let's say CUSMA does get scrapped. Would that be goodnight Irene for the auto sector? Dimitri says it wouldn't be good. The industry would shrink even more. But it also has cards to play. Like, if we go back to the Prime Minister's speech at Davos, he talked about middle powers, countries the size of Canada, and the need for us to band together.
This is what he's talking about. He's talking about developing relationships, developing arrangements, agreements for Canadians potentially to sell their vehicles outside of North America.
Dimitri says there are reasons other countries might buy our cars. Well, sure, they build their own, but right now things are in flux. The EV revolution is creating new opportunities. Canada also has the right raw materials, the critical minerals, the aluminum. And right now, other countries, our fellow middle powers, could be open to trading in a way they weren't before Trump came along.
In the 1990s and 2000s and 2010s, if Canadians had knocked on European doors or Mexican doors or South American doors or any other doors and said to people, hey guys, we really want to diversify our trade, perhaps that includes the auto sector, a lot of people would have said, well, look, you're with the Americans.
Now, when we knock on doors, countries could listen to what we have to say. But building cars and selling them is only part of this. Canadians buy nearly 2 million new cars a year. That makes us a top 10 global vehicle market. It gives us clout. And Dimitri thinks there are ways we can use that.
The Canadian government could say, for instance, to Hyundai, which sells about 250,000 vehicles a year in Canada, hey, You make a lot of money in Canada. 250,000 vehicles a year is about the same equivalent as one plant. Why doesn't Hyundai have an automotive facility in Canada? I mean, Toyota and Honda do, and, they've always had a philosophy of trying to build where they sell. And as good corporate citizens, you would expect them to do so.
Ottawa just started talking with Korea, home of Hyundai, about exactly that kind of thing. So maybe this country starts using more sticks and carrots to get other automakers here. Tariffs on your cars if you don't build in Canada, and some incentives if you do. The auto industry supports more than 600,000 direct and indirect jobs. But that's only part of what's riding on this. A lot of Canada's ability to manufacture stuff comes back to the auto sector. Building cars takes a lot of know-how, whether it's tool and die or software engineering. Countries that have those skills can make things. Planes, military equipment, rocket ships. Canada doesn't want to give that up. And Dimitri doesn't think we have to.
Some people might say I'm being Pollyannish or being unrealistic. And some people might say, how can you envision a world when it looks so bad in the North American auto industry for Canadians right now? But history tells us that there are ways of doing this. We used to ship hundreds of thousands of vehicles around the world.
Is that something we could actually do again? Keep building cars here and sell more of them into the world? If history is any guide, yeah. This is The Cost of Living. Listen to us on CBC Radio 1 or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Paul Habershood. Here's a question. When was the last time you changed banks? Well, maybe you're like, last year. Got a sweet new customer bonus. Okay, but if you're someone that opened an account when you got your first job and have been there ever since, have you ever asked yourself why you're so loyal?
When Laura Elizabeth sold her house in Calgary, she made a tidy profit. So, she had a chunk of change she needed to park somewhere. A bank was offering a promotion for new customers if they opened a savings account.
I was like, look at that. 5% interest. Well, I'm going to put my money there.
The catch? That sweet, sweet interest was only for 3 months. After that, the rate dropped to about 0.5%. But Laura was okay with that, because after 3 months,
I switched to another bank, and I've just been switching every 3 months for almost 4 years.
Laura has made thousands of dollars doing this. And yet, most of us don't.
I had a bank that I was at forever that I had to keep putting money in to pay my monthly fee just because I didn't want to switch the bank.
Eddie Shepard is the executive vice president at Abacus Data, a polling firm. According to a recent survey, 2/3 of Canadians say they have no plans to switch banks, even if they have something to gain.
You think that when you're looking for a financial institution, you want better return on your money and you want better rates.
Eddie says a lot of Canadians have been with the same bank since they were kids. And that long-standing relationship makes it hard to leave.
The status quo bias plays a significant role here.
Oh, did I mention he has a PhD in psychology?
Psychologically, the status quo is safe, it's familiar, it's comfortable. When you think about switching, it's unfamiliar and it's uncertain and it could feel risky. So that emotional comfort of staying will often win out.
The other reason a lot of us don't switch banks? It can be a pain in the ass. You gotta pick up the phone, wait on hold, fill out paperwork.
And that friction is a point in which a lot of banks actually do succeed because they have these things in place that make it maybe not difficult, but annoying for people to switch.
But some Canadians are testing the waters with new online banks like Wealthsimple and Neo Financial. They're luring customers over with easy-to-use apps and eye-popping incentives, like a chance to win a $3 million home or a bar of gold. Natasha Knox is the founder of Alafia Financial Wellness in Vancouver. She says if you want to switch banks as often as you switch the filter on your furnace,
there's no harm, right? And, the more money that we're talking, the more valuable it becomes.
But moving your savings account to a different bank, that's one thing. Switching your everyday checking account?
Like that's a project. That's where your payroll goes. That's where people start paying bills out of, every single automatic bill payment.
Natasha says you would need to make a list of everything going in and out, or risk missing something like a mortgage payment or your tax refund. In other words, you need to be organized, like Laura Elizabeth, who has opened and closed high-interest savings accounts many, many times.
Let me see, Tangerine, CIBC, BMO, RBC. Did I say Tangerine? All of the major banks.
And some more than once.
Mm-hmm. Yes, some more than once.
And she's never earned less than 4% interest.
It's a fast and easy way to make money. And it's a sure thing, right? It's a sure thing.
For The Cost of Living, I'm Danielle Nerman.
So, Leah Hendry, Hudson's Bay Company. It's gone, but not forgotten. Before it closed, were you shopping there? Were you, hitting up Bay Days?
A little bit. I mean, who doesn't like a good sale, Paul? But I did go into the Bay in downtown Montreal a few weeks before it shut down last summer, and it was filled with people, trying on everything from discount jeans to evening gowns. So many people were there just to kind of get that last glimpse of the store.
Well, a last glimpse of the inside, but if they want to go by, they can check out the building anytime.
Yeah, the old historic ones are hard to miss. There are 5 of these flagship stores in Vancouver, Calgary, Ottawa, Toronto, and in Montreal. And they're pretty grand old buildings. In Montreal, the former Bay is a red sandstone on St. Catherine Street, the city's main shopping district. The Old Bay in Toronto is on Queen Street in the downtown core.
And like you're saying, they're big. They can take up blocks. That is a lot of prime real estate.
And all of it is now up for sale. Those buildings are all looking for buyers. HBC is in receivership, so it's sort of a mishmash of different owners, landlords, and real estate companies right now. They aren't open to bids just yet, and there's no price tag on them publicly, but we know that these buildings are worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
So it's going to take serious money to step in and buy these things, obviously, and then more serious money to redevelop them. And then, of course, how long that all takes, that is something that matters to these cities.
Yeah, because right now they're boarded up and sitting empty. And it will likely be years before any of them reopen.
And in the meantime, for the neighborhoods...
Well, vacant buildings are never a good look. There's been a John Fluvog shoe store right across from the Bay in Calgary for about 14 years. Kimberly Beckett is the manager. She says when the Bay was open, it attracted shoppers into the neighborhood. But now?
It feels like there's an emptiness. It was such a huge place for so long. So it definitely feels like something's missing for sure. It is hard to see it sitting empty when you can see so much potential. And the foot traffic definitely has, affected us here at Fluvog.
So foot traffic downtown is off, but, you can't pin all that on the Bay.
No, I mean, it's not entirely to blame. There are lots of vacant offices in downtown Calgary too, but losing the Bay hasn't helped. It means there are fewer shoppers on the street.
I mean, and it's hard. There is some, unhoused people that, are, would damage the windows, which is hard to see.
Kimberly says the property owner is doing a good job of trying to keep the building safe, But yeah, some windows have been broken, there's been graffiti on the walls, and some of the plaques and the brass detailing around the windows has been stolen.
That's a shame.
It is. Moshe Lander teaches economics at Concordia University in Montreal. He says empty buildings can be a magnet for trouble.
There's the potential for a lot of problems there because there's nothing there to draw people. Part of the problem then is that the longer that it takes to come up with something, the more that the area around it deteriorates.
So an empty building can be not a great thing for a neighborhood.
Yeah, and the longer it stays empty,
the building itself starts to lose its value and attraction because somebody who's going to come in is going to say, not only do I have to take over the site, but now I also have 5 to 10 years worth of remediation to get it up to the standard that I can then do what I intended to do with it. That's the danger then, is that, yes, it becomes less and less attractive with each passing moment.
So if these old bay buildings sit empty for too long, it's just going to become that much harder to sell them?
yes. And redeveloping these buildings won't be easy either. Some have heritage designation, which means you can't just bulldoze them and start over. The exteriors would have to be preserved. The other issue is the sheer size. Phil Vandermeer is a Calgary architect. He says these buildings were designed to be department stores. The floor plans are huge.
Although it has really nice windows, really nice facades on the edges of the building, the deep floor plates mean that it's hard to get light to the center of the building, and that means it's more difficult to use it for especially housing and in office buildings too. You know, we in a Canadian climate, we work during the prime hours of sunlight in the winter, and so it's nice to have access to light in our workspaces.
Well, yeah, no doubt. Windows are great. And, sometimes windows are also legally mandated by building codes.
Yeah, you need windows for bedrooms, and this is a big challenge for these buildings. To redevelop the Old Bay in Winnipeg and bring more light in, architects had to hollow out the middle of the building to create an atrium, and the roof was lifted off so a glass ceiling could be put in.
Leah, I'm not a contractor, at least not professionally, but I can say this, that doesn't sound easy.
It was not. It took construction workers 7 months to lift out more than 1,300 concrete blocks to create this atrium, which is roughly the size of an NHL rink. And the price tag for the reno has doubled since the plans were announced. It's gone from $130 million to more than $300 million.
Okay, so big cost overrun. They're probably going to want that to pay itself back somehow. What's going to go in there?
A bunch of different things, affordable housing units, some offices, and a couple restaurants.
What about other bays around the country? Could they do something similar?
It's too early to say, but yeah, Winnipeg could be a model, or what they've done in Victoria. The Old Bay there has been turned into lofts, retail, and a public market. And that sounds pretty good to Kim Beckett at Fluvogs in Calgary.
It's always kind of been known as this sort of shopping district, and I would hate to see it get away from that. And so how awesome would it be to have like a big Stacks Fifth Avenue or something? That would be a dream. But even if it was, little vendors, little markets, some kind of shopping to kind of keep that sort of customer here to come see us.
It kind of feels like it would have to be a bunch of little stores because the big department store model, the bay is closed, right? That's kind of a thing of the past.
And the big retailers that we do have, Walmart, IKEA, Canadian Tire, they usually prefer big box centers that come with lots of parking.
Which is why we're talking about these grand old buildings sitting empty. But they do still have great locations. So you got to figure at some point something will happen.
Yes, but whatever it is, it's going to take some time. Just as an example, the Winnipeg Bay closed at the end of 2020, and it was supposed to be finished this year. But that's been pushed back to 2028.
So we're looking at 8 years there, maybe. And then most of these other bays around the country, you're saying they're not even on the block yet.
That's right. But Moshe Landers says governments could help speed things up. They could create some incentives. Cities have control over property taxes on these buildings, which can run into the millions. Moshe says they could give potential developers a break on property taxes and make the tax cut conditional on how many people they bring downtown.
For every 1,000 people you bring, we'll cut it $1 million. I think that there's easy economic incentives if the city is ready to get involved and try and not necessarily choose a winner, but at least encourage somebody to step forward soon.
You could see why cities would want to do this, right? They want people out in their downtowns, eating, shopping, just doing all the things.
Bringing some life back. But Moshe says they also need to tread carefully. It may be painful to see these flagship bay buildings frozen in time, but he says it's better to take it slow and make sure whatever goes in there is a good fit.
We're only limited by our lack of creativity. Somebody will see it and say, oh, I know what to do with this space. But you can't rush it either. The worst thing that you can do is try and force something to go into that spot and find that it fails too.
Well, they're beautiful buildings and they're in great spots.
Well, that has to count for something.
Right? Thanks, Leah.
You're welcome.
That's all for the show. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show is produced by Daniel Nerman, Leah Hendry, and Jennifer Keane, with help from Jeff Kynock. Oh, and just before we go, we're working on a story about insurance. Yeah, insurance, because we are a cavalcade of good times. And we're wondering, have you ever dinged up your car and not claimed it on your insurance? You decided to just go ahead and pay out of pocket instead. Now, if that sounds like you or someone you know, would you have a minute to chat? We'd really like to hear about it. Our email is costofliving@cbc.ca. So please, drop us a line. Now, that said, here's hoping we're all accident-free. Thanks for listening. I'm Paul Habersrud.